There are some secrets a father keeps because he is ashamed, others are kept because he is afraid. But the secret I kept for 20 years, I kept because I loved my daughter more than I loved being understood. The day Emma uninvited me from her wedding, I didn't argue, I didn't beg, I didn't remind her of everything I'd done for her. I simply said, "If that's what makes you happy, sweetheart, I'll stay away." She thought I was accepting her decision. She had no idea I was hiding a truth that could change everything she believed about her childhood. A truth I'd promised her mother I would never reveal. And when Emma finally discovered it, she didn't call me, she didn't text me. She drove nearly 6 hours through the night just to stand on my doorstep at sunrise, crying, and the first thing she said was, "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? My name is Henry Carter. I'm 69 years old, and for most of my adult life, I was a high school history teacher in a small town in Ohio. I wasn't rich. I never wanted to be. My father used to tell me that a man's worth wasn't measured by the size of his house or the number in his bank account. It was measured by the number of people who could honestly say, 'He made my life better.' I carried those words with me my entire life. I married my wife, Grace, when we were 25. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 5 new friends. She loved gardening, she loved old movies, and more than anything, she loved our daughter. Emma was born 3 years after our wedding. From the moment I held her, I knew my life would never belong entirely to me again. Every decision I made after that had someone else's future attached to it. When Emma was 6, Grace noticed something unusual. Our daughter had been asking questions about why she didn't have the same last name as some of the children at school. We laughed it off. Children ask strange questions. But one evening, Grace and I sat at the kitchen table after Emma had gone to bed. She looked worried. "Henry, what? There's something we need to talk about." I knew immediately that it was serious. "What happened?" She reached across the table and took my hand. "Emma isn't the daughter you think she is." I stared at her. "What?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. Then she explained everything. 20 years earlier, before Emma was born, Grace had discovered she was unable to have children naturally. We had spent years trying. Doctors, treatments, appointments, hope, disappointment. Again and again. Then, one rainy evening, Grace received a phone call from an old family friend. A young woman had given birth to a baby girl. She couldn't raise the child. She wanted the baby to have a loving home. The decision changed our lives. We adopted Emma. But there was one condition. The biological mother didn't want her identity revealed. Not then. Not ever. Grace and I agreed. We would raise Emma as our own. We would love her as our own. And we would never make her feel like she was anything less than our daughter. For years, that secret remained buried. Emma never suspected anything. She grew up believing Grace and I were her biological parents. And honestly, we never thought of her as anything else. She was our daughter. Period. Then, when Emma was 14, Grace became seriously ill. Her cancer diagnosis changed everything. During those final months, she made me promise something. "Henry, don't ever tell Emma." I stared at her. "She deserves to know eventually." "Maybe, but not now." "Why?" Grace reached for my hand. "Because right now, she doesn't need another reason to feel like the world is falling apart." She was right. Emma was already watching her mother disappear in front of her. I couldn't take away the only certainty she had left. So I promised. And after Grace passed away, I kept that promise. For 20 years, Emma grew up. She went to college. She became a successful attorney. She fell in love. She built a life of her own. And through all those years, I watched her become the strong, intelligent woman her mother always believed she would become. I wanted to tell her dozens of times. But every time I tried, I remembered Grace's final words. Let her be happy first. So I stayed silent. Then Emma met Daniel. Daniel came from a wealthy family. His parents owned several hotels and expensive properties. At first, I was happy for her. Money wasn't important to me. If he loved my daughter, that was enough. But after their engagement, everything changed. Emma started caring about things she had never cared about before. Designer clothes, exclusive clubs, luxury events. The opinions of people she'd never met. One evening, she came to my house and said, "Daniel's family is very traditional." I smiled. "Traditional how?" They expect a certain kind of wedding. I nodded. That's fine. Then she looked away. Dad? Yes? I need you to understand something. What? The wedding is going to be very formal. I won't embarrass you. She looked surprised. I didn't say that. But she didn't need to. I understood. A few weeks later, the phone rang. Emma's name appeared on my screen. I answered immediately. Hey, sweetheart. Dad? Her voice sounded cold. We need to talk. Okay. It's about the wedding. I sat down. What about it? She took a deep breath. I've decided you're not going to come. I stared at the wall. For several seconds I couldn't speak. You're uninviting me? I'm sorry. Why? Daniel's family. She hesitated. They think it would be better. I closed my eyes. And what do you think? Silence. Finally. She whispered, I think they're right. My heart broke, but I refused to let her hear it. Okay. Dad, it's fine. No, it isn't. I'll stay home. She began crying. I love you. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I love you too. The call ended. I sat alone in the darkness. Then I looked at the old photograph sitting on my desk. It showed Grace holding a tiny newborn Emma. Behind the photograph was a small envelope. The envelope I had carried with me for 20 years. Inside was the original adoption document and a letter from Emma's biological mother. I had promised never to show it to Emma, but now I wondered if keeping that promise was still the right thing to do, because I knew something Emma didn't. Her wedding wasn't the only thing her biological mother had left behind. There was another secret, one that could completely change the way Emma saw her family, and the reason she had been given to us in the first place. The morning after Emma uninvited me from her wedding, I woke up before sunrise. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. I think they're right. Those 4 words kept repeating inside my head. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in 20 years, I placed the old envelope in front of me. It contained the truth I'd promised Grace I would never reveal. I stared at it for almost an hour. Then I put it back in the drawer. I couldn't do it. Not yet. Grace had trusted me with that secret, and I had spent half my life protecting it. I wasn't going to break that promise simply because my daughter had broken my heart. But something had changed. I could feel it. The secret wasn't going to stay buried forever. 3 days later, I received a phone call from an unknown number. Hello? A woman's voice answered. Is this Henry Carter? Yes. My name is Margaret. I froze. There was something about her voice, something familiar. Margaret who? She hesitated. Margaret Wilson. I nearly dropped the phone. Wilson. That was the last name written on the adoption papers, the last name belonging to the woman who had given birth to Emma. I stood up from the kitchen table. How did you get this number? I've been trying to find you for years. My heart began pounding. Why? Because I need to tell you something about Emma. I couldn't speak. Margaret continued. I know you promised Grace you'd never tell Emma about me. How do you know about Grace? Because she wrote to me. My knees suddenly felt weak. She what? Your wife contacted me shortly before she died. I sat down. What did she say? Margaret took a deep breath. She asked me to stay away from Emma. I closed my eyes. Why? Because she believed Emma wasn't ready to know the truth. That sounded exactly like Grace, but Margaret wasn't finished. However, she also told me that if something happened to you, I was supposed to find Emma. My heart stopped. Why? Because there was something she wanted Emma to know. I immediately thought of the second letter, the one Grace had never mentioned. What is it? Margaret's voice became quiet. Emma wasn't given away because her mother didn't love her. I swallowed. I know. No, Henry, you don't. There's much more to the story. I waited. Margaret finally said, Emma's biological father didn't know she existed. I stared at the wall. What? He was told the baby had died. My heart pounded. Who was he? I can't tell you over the phone. Why not? Because I don't know who is listening. I almost laughed. Margaret, this sounds like something from a movie. I wish it were. Then she gave me an address. Meet me there tomorrow. Before hanging up, she said one final thing. Bring the envelope Grace left. The next afternoon, I drove nearly an hour to a small coffee shop outside town. Margaret was sitting alone near the window. She was older than I expected, maybe in her late 60s. Gray hair, tired eyes, a nervous expression. When she saw me, she stood. "Henry?" I nodded. "You look just like Grace described." That sentence hurt. We sat across from each other. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Margaret looked at the envelope in my hand. She kept her promise. What promise? She promised me Emma would never grow up believing she was unwanted. I looked down. She never did. Good. Margaret took a deep breath. Then, you need to hear the rest. She explained that when Emma was born, Margaret had been young and struggling. She had no family support, no money, no stable home. But there was another problem. Emma's biological father came from an extremely wealthy family. His parents had threatened Margaret. They told her that if she tried to keep the baby, they would take Emma away through the courts. Margaret was terrified, so she agreed to a private adoption. Grace and I became Emma's parents. But there was something I never knew. Margaret had kept one photograph, a photograph of Emma's biological father holding her for the first and only time. She placed it on the table. I looked at it, and my heart stopped. I knew that face. Not personally, but I'd seen it before. Daniel's father. I stared at Margaret. "Are you telling me?" She nodded. "Daniel's father is Emma's biological father." I couldn't breathe. The man whose family had decided I wasn't good enough to attend Emma's wedding was the same man whose son was about to marry her. But Margaret shook her head. "There's more." I waited. "Daniel doesn't know. His father doesn't know either. Or at least, that's what I believed." She pulled another document from her purse. It was an old hospital record. The father's name was clearly printed. I stared at it for several seconds. Then everything suddenly made sense. The strange interest Daniel's parents had shown in Emma, the questions about her childhood, the way his father had stared at her the first time they met. I had thought they were judging her. Maybe they were recognizing her. Why did Grace never tell me this? Margaret looked down. Because she was afraid. Of what? That Emma would discover her entire life had been built on a lie. I shook my head. No, her life wasn't a lie. I raised her. Grace loved her. That's the truth. Margaret smiled sadly. That's exactly what Grace told me. She reached into her bag. Then she handed me a second envelope. This arrived at my house 2 months after Grace died. My hands began trembling. It was Grace's handwriting, again, but this time, the envelope had Emma's name written across the front. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. My precious Emma. If you're reading this, then something has happened that I prayed would never happen. You may believe your father kept something from you because he didn't trust you. That's not true. He kept it from you because he loved you. Henry was never your biological father, but he was the man who chose you. Every morning, every night, every difficult moment. He chose you when you were a baby. He chose you when I was dying. And he will choose you even if you decide not to choose him. I couldn't continue reading. I folded the letter. Tears filled my eyes. Then I noticed one final sentence at the bottom. But there is one thing Henry doesn't know. My heart began pounding. I read the sentence, and suddenly, everything changed. Because Grace had written, Emma's biological father has been looking for her for years. I stared at Margaret. Where is he now? She slowly shook her head. I don't know. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her face turned pale. Henry. What? She showed me the message. It contained only 6 words. He knows you have the letter. I looked toward the cafe window. A black SUV was parked across the street. Someone was sitting inside, watching us, and suddenly, I realized the secret I'd protected for 20 years was no longer mine to protect. For several seconds, neither Margaret nor I moved. The black SUV remained parked across the street. Its engine was running. Someone was sitting behind the windshield watching us. Margaret lowered her phone. Henry, don't look at the car again. Why? Because if they know we noticed them, they'll leave. I paid the bill. We walked out through the back entrance of the cafe. Neither of us spoke until we reached my truck. Once inside, Margaret finally said, What are you going to do? I looked at Grace's letter resting on the dashboard. I'm going to tell Emma the truth. But you promised Grace. I know. My voice cracked. But Grace also told me to protect our daughter. And right now, protecting her means giving her the truth. That evening, I drove home and found Emma waiting on my front porch. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen from crying. The moment she saw me, she stood. Dad, I stopped. She ran toward me. Then she hugged me. Not the polite hug she'd given me in recent years. Not the quick hug before leaving. A real hug. The kind she used to give me when she was a little girl. I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. You don't have to apologize yet. Yes, I do. I uninvited you. I listened to people who didn't know you. I let them make me ashamed of the man who raised me. I gently held her shoulders. Emma, there's something you need to know. She looked at me. I found Mom's letter. My heart stopped. Where? Margaret gave it to me. Her eyes widened. Who is Margaret? I took a slow breath. Your biological mother. Emma's face went completely pale. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then she whispered, My biological mother? I nodded. She stepped backward. You're not… No. I swallowed. I'm not your biological father. She stared at me. Tears filled her eyes. But you're my dad. I nodded. Always. She suddenly covered her face. I don't understand. I know. So I told her everything. About the adoption, about her biological parents, about Grace's decision, about the years of silence, and finally, about the photograph, about Daniel's father. When I finished, Emma sat down on the porch steps. She stared into the distance. Daniel. I nodded. His father is your biological father. She shook her head. No, that's impossible. I know it sounds impossible, but Margaret has the records. Emma stood. Does Daniel know? No. Does his family know? I don't know. She started crying. Why didn't Mom tell me? I sat beside her. Because she was afraid the truth would destroy the life you had. Emma looked at me. But it didn't. No. It destroyed something else. What? My pride. She wiped her tears. I was ashamed of you. And you were never ashamed of me? I smiled. Never. She leaned against my shoulder. I thought you weren't enough. You were wrong. I know. The next morning, Daniel came to my house. He looked confused. Emma told me everything. I invited him inside. He sat across from me. For several minutes he stared at the floor. My father is her biological father. He nodded. I found out last night. What did he say? Daniel's expression changed. He denied everything. But then he saw the hospital record and he went silent. I already knew what that silence meant. Daniel looked at me. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because no one knew what would happen. He lowered his head. I almost married my own sister. The words hung heavily in the room. Emma was standing behind him. She began crying. Daniel immediately stood. I'm sorry. This wedding, we can't continue. Emma nodded. I know. There was no anger between them, only shock, grief, and the realization that the future they'd imagined had disappeared overnight. A week later, Emma and I traveled to meet Margaret. She had one final piece of information. The biological father wanted to meet Emma. His name was Richard Wilson. He was older now. He lived only 2 hours away. Emma wasn't sure she wanted to see him. So I told her something Grace once told me. You don't owe anyone a relationship. You only owe yourself the truth. She decided to go. When Richard opened the door, he stared at her. His face changed. I watched as his eyes filled with tears. Emma? She nodded. I'm Emma. He covered his mouth. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he whispered, I thought you were gone. Emma's voice trembled. I was never gone. You just never knew where to find me. Richard began crying. I was told you died. I believed it for 40 years. Emma looked at him. Why didn't you look harder? He couldn't answer. That silence was answer enough. Emma turned toward me. I knew she was asking without words. Do I stay? Do I leave? I simply nodded. Whatever she chose, I would support her. She walked inside. I remained outside. For nearly an hour, I waited. When Emma finally returned, she looked peaceful, not happy, not healed, but peaceful. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I." She smiled. "But I know one thing." "What?" She wrapped her arms around me. "You're still my dad." I hugged her tightly. "That's all I've ever wanted." Months later, the wedding that had once been the center of everyone's lives was canceled. There was no scandal, no public announcement, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet decision to walk away from a situation that should never have happened. Emma eventually moved into a smaller apartment. She left the law firm that had become obsessed with appearances. She started volunteering at an organization that helped children find their biological families. One evening, she came to my house carrying a small wooden box. "Dad, what's this?" She placed it on the table. Inside was Grace's wedding ring. I stared at it. "Where did you find this?" "Mom left it for me." I picked it up carefully. Emma smiled through tears. She wanted me to have it when I finally understood what real family meant. I couldn't speak. Emma took my hand. "You kept a secret for 20 years because you loved me. And now I finally understand." I looked at Grace's photograph. "I wish she could have seen this." Emma nodded. "She did." I smiled. "How do you know?" "Because she knew you'd never stop choosing me." A year later, Emma came home for Christmas. She brought a small gift. I opened it. Inside was a framed photograph. It was a picture of me, Emma, and Grace from years ago. Underneath it were the words, "The man who chose me before I could choose him." I felt tears running down my face. Emma hugged me. "You're not my biological father." "I know, but you're the only father I've ever needed." I held her tightly, and suddenly, I understood something I'd spent 20 years trying to explain. Family isn't always created by blood. Sometimes it's created by a choice. A choice to stay, a choice to sacrifice, a choice to love someone even when they don't understand your love. My daughter once uninvited me from her wedding because she believed I wasn't good enough to stand beside her. She later discovered the secret I'd protected for 20 years. But the biggest secret wasn't that I wasn't her biological father. The biggest secret was something much simpler. I had chosen her, before she could speak, before she could remember me, before she could ever choose me back. And I would choose her again, every single time, because being a father was never about biology. It was never about money. It was never about status. It was about being there when the world walked away. And when my daughter finally understood that, she didn't need to ask me to attend her wedding anymore. She simply looked at me and said, "Dad, wherever my future takes me, I want you walking beside me." And that was enough.